Okay, we are live, back another night. This time, the Senate point of view. Senator Justin Reedy. Senator, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am hanging in there. We had a lot of very important, but a lot of doom and gloom from Delegate Robin Grammer yesterday. So I don't know how much good news there is from the Senate, but maybe if at the end you can give us a little silver lining, that might be good. So why don't you just introduce yourself for the audience real quick?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. Always happy to talk with our great Republicans and conservative activists in Montgomery County and across the state that I know are watching. I know it's tough for you folks in Montgomery County. I know because I interact with the people that represent you, and their point of view is a lot different from mine. So it's a challenge, but we appreciate how hard you all work and are working to build our party in Montgomery County. My name is Justin Reedy. I serve in the state Senate. I'm one of 15 Republican members. We're out of 47 total. So there's 32 Democrats and 15 Republicans. I represent Carroll County, Maryland, District 5. So I have most of the land mass of Carroll County, I guess you would say. There's a couple pockets that are represented by different senators.
Slightly friendlier jurisdiction.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. So of course, we love to when you're able to, and we can all be together again. We'd love to have people come up and visit. We've got beautiful rolling hills and great local restaurants and great things to see and do. But I represent this area. This is my second term in the state Senate. And my goal when I ran for office several years ago was to bring a real energetic conservative voice to Maryland, to Annapolis, and to Maryland politics. Not that we didn't have conservatives already serving, of course, but in my area in particular, we had a lot of the same folks for years and years, and a lot of them were good people. But I felt like a sort of energetic new approach to try to go after what at that time when I first ran for office was the O'Malley years. So it was a very difficult time for us then. And so I've tried to do that every step of the way, fighting for principles of free market conservative principles that we know will help everybody because we'll grow jobs, we grow the economy. I view the economy and resources in our economy as a bakery, not a static pie. And my friends in Montgomery County, a number of my colleagues that are on the other side of the aisle, they tend to have more of a who's getting the piece of the pie versus how can we bake more pies. So that's sort of my economic perspective, and I'm also very, I'm pro-life, and I'm very pro-Second Amendment. Fighting very hard to try to defend our Second Amendment rights and constitutional rights, which are always on the chopping block.
Always.
So that's a little bit about me. In my real quote unquote real job, I work for a company that does targeted digital and mail advertising and data mining, data strategy. So I kind of have a private sector, quote unquote, real job, and legislators are, as you know, I know, Alex, are part-time. So kind of have two jobs. And right now we're staying very busy trying to help constituents, trying to kind of push to get the state back open as soon as possible. And then also working I'm working in sales right now. It's not the most easy time, but I'm thankful to have the job because I know a lot of folks have lost theirs. And so we're trying to do everything we can to, as I said, to get the state back on moving again and open again. So anyway, that's a little bit about me.
Well, I have to remind myself every time I'm really annoyed with my job that it's good that I at least still have one. So,
sure. Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit? I think we're so focused right now on COVID-19, and obviously for good reason, that part of what I hope we can accomplish is just remind people that there are some other important things that have happened recently, and it's important that we don't lose sight of some of the things that the Democrats crammed through at the end of the legislative session. So why don't you just take it from there?
Yeah, for sure. I think every session, when you get to the end of the 90 days, there's always a little bit of a mad dash for them to pass as much as they can. This session, we were concluding the session early. We ended at 72 days, which let me tell you, we could do that every year. And I think about 60 days would be plenty of time to do everything that needs to get done. And probably still a lot of things that shouldn't. But the idea of us staying in as long as we did because we really weren't sure what COVID-19 was going to be. We knew that it could be very serious. It has proven to be a serious issue. I know there's, question of whether it's ended up being as bad as people thought it would be. On the other hand, had we not taken some steps early on nationally and in our state, certainly could have been worse. But putting that aside, knowing what we knew at the time, we felt very, the goal was to get out of session as quickly as possible, pass a balanced budget, which of course we have to do constitutionally, pass, there's local county bills that need to pass so county governments can do what they need to do. There were some appointments, there were some things that departments needed so that they could be more nimble during this time. But there was a whole lot of bills that had been getting a lot of momentum, things like a plastic bag tax and taking away the governor's ability to control the budget process at the start, a bill about hair discrimination, all kinds of bills, and bills that I don't necessarily have a problem with sometimes, depending on what they are. Some of them may be some silly bills, some bills that I might vote for, depending on what they were. I think if there was a puppy mill bill and I voted for it, but I'm like, is this what we should be doing? They rammed through in the final few days about 600 pieces of legislation. And difference between that and what happens at the end of session is the public, other than some live streaming attempts, the public really was not able to be present at a lot of the voting or hearings.
I think the important word there is attempts. They weren't working too well when I tried them.
No, and actually it really revealed how backwards our IT systems are in the General Assembly. Just this is an inside baseball down in the weeds, but it wasn't all nefarious. I think it wasn't nefarious necessarily. It was more the infrastructure really couldn't handle thousands and thousands of people tuning in, which is not how it should be. And we are making changes, and so that's maybe a good thing that could come out of it. But basically, it is true that a lot of one thing that people were saying is there were a lot of bills passing without even a hearing. Every bill had a hearing, but there's hearings and there's hearings. There's hearings where the public can really be engaged, and where both houses get a chance to really flesh the bill out. And there's like a hearing where, oh, well, the Senate had a long hearing, so the House is just going to move it because it had a hearing. Well, it didn't have a hearing in the House. The bill changed somewhat, and vice versa. You had stuff coming over from the House the same way. So among the things that these folks decided to ram through in the middle of frankly, a national emergency was a massive, a national economic emergency too, not just medical. The medical part of it is certainly very important, the human cost, but the economy we knew at that point was going to be taking a huge hit. Obviously, as I've said, we'd like to get it where we're starting to ramp it back up, but passing this $35 billion education expansion over the course of, they want to increase education spending really by almost, counting the local part of it, about $4 billion a year over the next 10 years. This now, in the face of what looks like we'll be coming into the session next year with nearly a $2.5 or $3 billion deficit, even under good circumstances, even if we can get the economy moving again here in short order. So they rammed through that massive expansion of education spending. And a number of other bills, like the bill trying to limit the governor's ability, any governor's ability to control the budget the way it's been in Maryland for decades. And it was something that's been put in place historically to safeguard the state's budget because the General Assembly bankrupted about 50 years ago. So that was something they rammed through. The plastic bag tax and ban actually failed. They tried to get that through. We were able to defeat that. They passed some gun control stuff. They passed.
Just to stop you there for a second with the plastic bag thing, there are states that have that now that have rescinded it just because the reusable bags mean there's more interaction with stuff other people have touched.
Well, can you imagine the mad dash that happened at grocery stores, about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago? Can you imagine if they were saying, oh, now, of course, the law wouldn't have been final by then, but can you imagine if they'd be like, well, no, we can't do plastic bags? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just a stupid kind of virtue signaling bill that will do very little to help anybody. But, again, that flew through the House of Delegates. And we did stop that one in the Senate. But there were a lot of other things that got through. But particularly of concern is we had bills to, give years of funding, years of continued funding to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. Had bills about other types of isolated, spending $500,000 here and $1 million there. It starts to really add up. And then, of course, obviously the Kerwin thing, really bad. So that was frustrating. I will say in the Senate, to give you sort of the Senate perspective, it does work a little differently. I know you had Delegate Grammer last week. The Senate, I'll give credit a little bit to our leadership in the Senate, including the Senate President, who was new this year. He's a very thoughtful guy, and so he's very policy oriented. And I don't agree with him on a number of policies, but he did at least allow there to be pretty robust debate. And we Republicans in the Senate were able to get amendments on a lot of things, including the Kerwin bill, that made the product that did pass, I would say, better. I hasten to add, when I say better, there's degrees of better.
Less bad.
Well, they put it. There were some things like, and some of my colleagues voted for it because they were part of the process of getting amendments on it and felt like, in good faith, they wanted to continue that through. I didn't vote for it. I didn't support it. I spoke against it. But it's one of those things where sometimes folks are feeling like they're trying to triage, and if a few Republicans didn't vote for it, they wouldn't have done any of these amendments. I don't want to. That's the argument that they'll have to make. For me, even though we did put in like a trigger every year, if the budget we get drops below a certain amount of money, they're supposed to reconsider all these formulas. There's a 5-year look back to say, is this working? There are some accountability measures in it, but it still spends way too much money, committing way too much money. And there's some changes to what it's doing on public policy in the area of education that I think are not all bad. There's a new focus on career and college readiness as opposed to just getting kids through the system. There are some accountability measures. They're not as strong as I would like. There was a few things related to improving classroom discipline, but again, it didn't go nearly as far as I thought it should to really ensure that teachers have more ability to have a say over whether a disruptive kid keeps coming back in their classroom and being disruptive. So the positive was we got some amendments on it that made some things better, but the negative was just, again, in the middle of a national emergency, we could have not passed it. Already next year, we were going to be doing a lot of it anyway. It's already funded for the next couple of years, some of the Kerwin principles. So we could have waited. Even if you wanted to pass it, it would have been smart to wait until, because I think the governor, I would expect the governor to veto it. It's just not fiscally even feasible right now for us to spend, even if you wanted to, which I don't. I was not against, I'll tell you, the other perspective I would have is I wasn't against the idea of some increased spending on targeted things to try to, if you're telling me we want to go into a place like Baltimore City and use proven techniques from other jurisdictions to improve reading scores and literacy, I'd be okay with that idea if you can document that every couple of years you're showing progress. But instead of doing this big one-size-fits-all huge spend. So, and again, if you would improve the ability of teachers to work with parents and administrators instead of having administrators sort of back off when kids are being disruptive. There was a lot of things I thought could have been better with all that. So I'm rambling a little bit, I guess, but I read that the bill was about 200 pages. I read every iteration of the bill. It was almost 200 pages every time to be sure I was understanding what we were doing because I knew how important it was. And I kept finding things that I'm just like, could we fix this? Could we fix that? And a couple things did get fixed, but a lot of it didn't. So again.
And you didn't feel because you'd pointed things out to fix that you had to vote for it?
Absolutely not. I did not. And I never would, I would never, I think you have to be really careful. It is true that as a legislator, sometimes you may have an opportunity to say, hey, if we could amend this, then I'd be able to support this bill, even if it's not 100% something that I would do, because I know it's going to pass anyway. And if you will give us this amendment, then on something, but when it's something this large and complex, I just, again, the money, just too much money. And the other issue I had fundamentally with Kerwin, and I still have it, is even the things that I've said that are positive. And I try to be somebody who looks at positives and negatives. I certainly attack things I think are wrong. I try to be proactive and positive where I can be. Even if you think, even some of the positive things that are in some of the reforms and recommendations of the Kerwin Commission that I've tried to lay out here, it's still putting it on the same structure of public education that we've basically agreed hasn't worked the last 20 years. And it's not really changing that structure. So it's like, some of these things sound great, but if you're still counting on the same people to say it's working or not that you've been counting on the last 20 years, I'm not sure where that gets us other than spending a whole lot more money. So that was one of the big issues that dominated the whole session, and particularly at the end, passing it through.
So let's say, for instance, coronavirus was not a thing. So let's just take that out of the analysis of what people maybe were thinking closer in time. What would have had to have been done to actually be able to pay for Kerwin?
Well, I don't know if you remember, there were several tax increases proposed during the session. Oh, and they ran through some tax increases at the end too. They were watered way down. I'm not acting like that's anything to throw a party about, but obviously there were some proposals. One of your Montgomery County legislators had a great idea to increase sales tax revenue by $3 billion. And that's basically what their projections say we needed to fund this year over year over the next 10 years. The next couple of years, a lot of this stuff is quote unquote paid for with our money, but paid for in budget projections. But then beyond about, I think it was 2020, FY 2022 or 2023. I get the FYs and the actual years, got to get them right. But beyond that, you needed about $2.8 to $3.1 billion to pay for this stuff. And I think that's candidly a conservative estimate. So there was these tax increases proposed that didn't pass. They did pass they went from $2 a pack to $3.75 a pack on cigarettes, which I found incredibly offensive, again, in the middle of a global health epidemic that was going to tank the economy, that you're going to try to help find money on the backs of often the folks that are poor or the working class. If you're rich and smoke cigarettes, you probably afford $3.75 a pack, maybe. I don't think people should smoke. I don't smoke. I think it's bad. But and I don't even necessarily mind there being a tax on them. But this idea that you're going to keep increasing taxes, they also put like a 60% tax on Juul, which it's like, so that's the vape stuff. Like right. You would rather people do that than smoke cigarettes. So it raised over $100 million. It will, if it passes, if the governor doesn't veto it. And they also passed a tax on digital downloads. So your Netflix subscription, wanting to tax that. That's another great idea to do where everybody's quarantined. So that and all those taxes only get us about $300 million, which is a drop in the bucket for what they need because they're overextending the state's finances. And so yeah, that's what it would take is it would take massive economic growth. But we've taxed our job creators to the point where it's very hard to have that kind of massive private sector economic growth. Mm-hmm. And if the federal government decides, hey, this working from home business, maybe we don't need so many employees all clustered around Washington, D.C., which, I'm not sure that would ever happen.
Montgomery County, our local government here is playing government on easy mode, and they never seem to realize that so much of their tax base comes from federal employees who live here, that they've driven out so many of the jobs, but they still have people with a decent income living here because they work in DC.
Well, and theoretically, I guess if people started being able to work from home and they downsized a lot of stuff, I guess a lot of people could stay in Montgomery County, or they might decide, hey, I
go somewhere cheaper.
I can make $100,000 a year and live in, Jacksonville, Florida, or something. So that's in the weeds. That's kind of a ticking time bomb, but for Montgomery County and for the state. But that's my point. So obviously, I believe there's a way to improve education and even increase spending some over what we already do, even though we already spend a lot. Even increase it in a targeted way without ruining the state's fiscal outlook for 10 years. So
right.
It took us 10 years. It took us over 10 years to dig out from under Thornton. So it really. It's a big issue. It's a problem. So
now what about what's going to happen now that our tax revenues are clearly going to be significantly lower than projected?
Well, I think number one, I think the governor's going to veto this bill. I don't have that on, I haven't been told that specifically that's public or that he is, but I'm pretty confident.
I would certainly expect that he would.
I would think that they are not. What I don't know is in January, did they come back and override his veto? As I said, there's that 1 year trigger that we did get on the bill that would nullify this first year of stuff anyway. So I'm hopeful that he'll veto it and that we can have a rational discussion about what is possible. And frankly, if we're going to do anything with massive government, with massive quote unquote government spending, I would suggest we look at how we can incentivize job growth and economic growth and job creation again in the state by cutting the tax rate and getting rid of some of the regulations we have in the state that cost businesses money. That we're going to need to do a lot of that to get people back on their feet, to allow, I should say, I hope the strategy would not be some sort of handouts, but instead allow people to get back on their feet with really common sense pro-growth policies. You know, I won't hold my breath that many of my colleagues in the General Assembly will agree with that. But I think that's what we need to be focused on in the coming months as we prepare to go back in January.
Oh, so is that our silver lining for the night? That maybe two wrongs will balance out? Coronavirus and Kerwin?
Well, I never like to say there's a silver lining to to something that's obviously been very serious, but I do think I think there's a couple things at play here. I hope that, and I think we're starting to see it at the federal level and other places, and even in the state. I hope that coronavirus, number one, slows down the reckless abandon of spending and taxation in Maryland that has been mostly held at bay under Governor Hogan. And I think that's something he's done very well, is trying to keep the budget. Our budget has really grown. It's every year it grows a little bit, but it's under the rate of inflation. And we have fewer government employees today in the state of Maryland than we did when he took over. So even though some folks may, and I certainly support our president and not always agree with Governor Hogan on everything, I think on taxes and spending, he's been very good.
Considering the Democrats have a super majority, to pull that off is pretty impressive.
Right, but I think now it might force them to face reality, maybe. But then number two, I think innovation in government. I think when we can look, COVID-19 is going to force government to look at hopefully every regulation, everything we're doing, all our laws that relate to how people conduct business, how people do health administration, what people are sort of allowed to do relative to taking care of their own health. And what kind of regulations and stuff at the federal level. Some of this stuff we're finding out is that there were federal regulations in the way of people innovating early on in this process. So people want to blame President Trump. It was like, he wasn't the one that put regulations in place years and years and years ago that said you can't, like in an emergency, start trying different things with tests. To be in Washington State, they apparently were trying to do some cutting edge stuff, and they were stopped. And the press, the national press, tries to make it Trump's fault, President Trump's fault. It wasn't his fault. It was all these ridiculous big government regulations that.
I mean, he's slashed more regulations than probably any president in recent history.
Absolutely, he has. I mean, unfortunately, I guess I don't think he didn't know about those probably, but I mean, and sometimes in the health industry there are regulations there for a reason. They're not all regulations are bad, but it's like we don't have a very nimble government, and we need to become more nimble. And so I hope that this can be a time where businesses also, as well as corporate business, big corporations and government, can look and say, where can we be more efficient? Where can we do things that make more sense in the long term?
Well, I think that's a good positive note. I hope they pull that off. And honestly, I agree. You have been an energetic conservative force, and you've always been able to stay positive, which I really appreciate. So if we're going to make a change in Annapolis, we're going to need people like you in the Senate.
Well, I appreciate that. And I, invite folks to love to engage with people. My website's justinreedy.com. I'm on Facebook, Senator Reedy, Twitter, Justin Reedy. So invite people to follow and engage. Always happy to talk and share ideas. And I look forward to maybe coming on again sometime.
Sounds good. I will let you get back to your family, Senator. Thank you.
Have a great night. See you.